despite both teams having early buys, we've learnt plenty in this game about the Gold Coast Suns, the Sydney Swans, and the fantasy players that we should be considering for our salary cap and our draft sides in 2025. Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well. I do hope you're enjoying this series as we review every game of the Community Series. We're not really focused about the fantasy and SuperCoach points. We know those things will come. We're looking about roles, combinations, who's missing, and ultimately giving you our take on what we think you should be doing in your starting squads. Of all the games that had interesting absentees, this game had an absolute ton of them, especially if you're looking at some kind of intrigue about what this Sydney Swans midfield mix is going to look like. It's going to be really hard to have too much trust in what you saw, because missing in this game, you had Chad Warner and Isaac Heaney. Errol Gulden goes down early with an injury we'll talk about that in a little bit. Callum Mills, we knew, was missing. Papley was out from a forward perspective. And then for the Suns, Miller, who seems like he's going to be okay for round one, though, and Flanders, who does not. So there's a lot of really fantasy football relevant names for us. It doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater by any means, but there's not as much we could hold on to is probably the right thought process more than anything else. We do have to talk about Errol Gulden. Was about 15% time on ground. Just horrible seeing another player get injured. Just this week, Butters has gone down, Bontempelli has gone down. And now Errol. Most of these guys, at least over the past year or two, have been relatively bulletproof for us and super reliable and consistent. While at time of recording, nothing official has come out from the club that states how long he's going to be out for. Sam Edmund of SEN has said it's months, not weeks, is the diagnosis he's been hearing. As you're watching or listening to this, you might know the exact time. Regardless, he is not playing next week in opening round or anytime soon. So unfortunately, we do have to fade him. That is now 2 first-choice mids for the Swans that are now out of action in mids. That's a lot of pain point to cover Mills and now Gulden. So it will be interesting to see just how this ball movement and this team structures up in opening round. And that's the benefit of both of these two teams, right? Is ultimately whatever we've seen and observed in this game, we get a free look at it next week to ultimately tell us what the points are, what that advanced price movement is going to be in AFL Fantasy with the 2-in-1 week heading and then through round one, let alone the cadence acceleration by having 2 weeks potentially by the time they've done round one, whereas every other team that's not in opening round just is at one part of that price movement cycle and not on the bubble in SuperCoach and Dream Team. Gulden out changed a lot of this side, but so did no Mills, so did no Heaney. So how much weight do we put on this? Politely, I'd say low. I wouldn't take an absolute crazy amount out of this because this midfield mix changed a lot. Like James Jordan's the number one centre bounce guy. James Rowbottom, 70% centre bounces. Then McInerney's in there. This is not their first choice mids by any strength of it at all. So let's wait and see what Warner comes back. Heaney comes back. Let's actually get a look at this team. And while I do think there'll be a benefit for one player who we'll talk about in a moment, I just would want to see opening round is the big caveat about these Swans midfielders to see how this actually looks in a game that they care about. And this one wasn't it. But Errol's absence is horrific and terrible. It does mean he's someone we're going to look at for later in the season. How late? Well, we'll wait for that official confirmation from the club. But if he was planning to be in your starting squad, rule him out. I think probably what it does mean is it just gives some other outside ball users a little bit more opportunity for the Swans. Do we see a Mills when he comes back spend a little bit more time on the outside? Again, we'll wait to see what the club dish up for us, but I think it could be handy for some guys like a Campbell. McInerney, we know, is already a really good outside ball user, but these two guys, Campbell is the one that could pop. I don't mind that. Lloyd got so much of the ball in this game. I think that could be interesting. Again, remember, Blakey got taken out with moments of the game to go. So there's not a whole heap to read in this from a midfield perspective and a ball movement, but we needed to caveat that there. I think there are a couple of Swans, though, that we should talk about, and the most notable is a Matt Roberts. Last year, he was unbelievable at the back half of the year, scoring like a premium, moved into this defensive line and absolutely dominated. Again, in this game, we saw that eventuate to plenty of the kick-ins. He wasn't the only one doing it. Bice was getting a share. Florent was getting a share, but Roberts was getting his chance. But anytime there was a transition opportunity, it was him and Blakey that were getting these moments before Blakey was out of the game. So I like Roberts as an option. There's been a few that, as far as I'm concerned, players that have established themselves that if you were keen on pre-community series, you could feel relatively locked on. Now, if you weren't keen on them, it's a different conversation, but guys like Short, Fryer, Reed, and now Roberts, I think all have now done enough amongst some others where you go, I was pretty keen, I just wanted to see it, and now I see it. That gives you plenty of confidence. During our preseason, we did an episode in our series, The 50 Most Relevant, where from January 1, I count you through who I believe are the most important and relevant players to have a conversation about. I did an episode, I'm pretty sure it was with DR from SuperCoach Swordplay podcast around this. It's on this channel. Just go flicking through the thumbnails or just type into your search engine, Coaches Panel, Matt Roberts. You'll find it there. We did a great conversation about him. But in it, we highlighted that his scoring popped late last year with McInerney out. I think while McInerney's back, the Gulden absence, let alone how good he's looked in this role now, I think those two variables combined make Roberts really hard to fade against. You can absolutely do so. But when we're struggling for defenders that have a little bit of value inside them and have some proven pedigree, Roberts does tick a couple of those categories. I think you can pursue with some confidence what he is and was for us. The other Swan, so we've talked about Gulden, we've talked about Roberts. The other Swan that's really worth highlighting is Angus Sheldrick. 21 touches, 3 marks, 7 tackles in a game that was relatively bruise-free. I know people will look at the fantasy and SuperCoach points here and go, hello, SuperCoach, darn high 90s fantasy, lock and load. All I'd say around Sheldrick, who did have 57% centre bounces in this game, is watch what this role looks like in opening round. I think he's going to have this spot now. The departure of Mills, I thought, just elevated him from fringe to probable. Now the injury to Gulden, while different types of players, does change this makeup. I feel like Angus has gone ahead of a player like a Taylor Adams. He just offers something a little bit more dynamic about how he moves the ball. He's a little bit cleaner with his hands, offers way more defensive pressure, let alone some outlet on the spread than what Taylor Adams does. So I think Angus is someone you can really pursue as an on-field option. Again, let's watch, wait, and see what opening round holds for us from here. But to me, he's someone that if he wasn't in your mixtures, he absolutely should be now. He looked very, very good. Speaking of players that looked very, very good, Noah Anderson. Gee whiz, I love Noah Anderson and the way he plays the game. Mid-30 touches in this game. Getting involved on the scoreboard too. We know how favourable his scoring history has been at home in contrast to away. I just love the way this guy works. His work rate is elite. His defensive stuff is solid, though it doesn't present on the tackle column. He gets into space. He gets involved in the scoring chains and is absolutely somebody that you'd love to have in your side. So I think he's an absolute star. Whether or not that translates to becoming a top-tier premium midfielder, I'm not really too sure, but he's definitely somebody I want some shares in. If I was doing a draft, I think I really like him. Is it ever going to be enough? Well, if he gets to the right price point during the season, I might consider him, but the combination of a bunch of variables means I'm just not factoring him in at the start of the season. We should probably touch on Bailey Humphrey too. 20 touches. Butchered it a fair bit by his probably quality standards. I think he's someone that we could keep an eye on. Again, remembering there's no Took in this game. So let's watch, wait and see what opening round presents. But we don't need cheap forward options anymore. And the reason we don't is a number of these basement guys have presented themselves to us over this week and weeks prior. To now, we're really happy there. And then a couple of variables have fallen our way with the likes of all the injuries to the Bulldogs. So Sanders really pops up his stocks. The injury to Butters means Horne-Francis arguably is needed to be in the midfield even more than he is forward line. Rankin is playing through that midfield, and we know he's got some value, let alone the McRaes and Smiths that sit through there. And who knows? Garcia at the Saints is still yet to play, was a popular sort of half step above our cash cows that we're looking at. So we just don't need any more. But if you do want one more, let's see what Humphrey does in opening round. But Bailey, I do like his game. I'd like it to impact the scoreboard a little bit more. Does kind of bullet a gate in a few moments where he doesn't need to be. But there are some really smart and classy things that he does. So Bailey Humphrey, still keep him on your watch list. It's probably more relevant in some formats over others, but I do like Bailey Humphrey and what he could be for us. And then the other things that are probably worth talking about is just these these Suns defenders. They just flick the ball around like crazy, like Powell, Jeffrey, Noble, Rioli, like all of these guys. I almost want to merge them into one rather than highlight one, because it's mid-20 possessions for Powell. It's high 20 possessions for Jeffrey. It's mid to high 20 possessions for Noble. It's low 20 possessions for Rioli. Just their ability to get the ball out into space to these guys is pretty incredible. I do want a share of one of them on my draft side. If you're drafting on the keeper platform, I think you probably want a share of one of these guys. And the good news is players like Jeffrey and Powell are probably going to be later than Rioli, certainly. At Noble, maybe not as much. I just like what they do. Howe does look like the one from a SuperCoach perspective that's allowed to be a little bit more of the general and set things up from a framework perspective, whereas it's the run and carry of Jeffrey, Noble, Rioli, who use their speed rather than their foot skills as their ultimate accessory. I like a share of them on draft day. I think for me, when it comes to the Suns, couldn't start them as much as I might like to have a look and see. I want to see what opening round dishes up, remembering they missed round 2. I'd almost prefer to parachute into them rather than start them and use them as the outlet if one of Short, Roberts, Perryman, gosh, even a Sicily if you want to go all the way up. If one of them don't work out for me, I'd almost rather use them as the outlet option rather than the primary choice. So they do look like they're going to have a lot of ball movement flowing through them. Remembering the games are highly fluid, not a lot of stoppage, lots of transition ball movement sitting through there. You've got a guy like Matt Rowell, who is almost an 8 sort of plus tackle guy game. He's only getting 5 in a game like this. So lots of departure from stoppage, a lot of high transition through there. So I like what I saw from it. I don't know if I'd start with any of them on draft day. I'd like a splice of one of them because I feel like at any given week, any of them could pop. But in a classic format, I'd rather parachute into them than start and then need the outlet. But do you agree or disagree with my take on the Gold Coast Suns and the Sydney Swans? If you're watching this on YouTube, comment below and let me know what you think about this game and the things we could learn and observe. If you haven't subscribed and given us a 5-star rating over on the audio podcast, make sure you do so. We'd so greatly appreciate it. We'll be back again real soon with another one of these community series match reviews.